Hi, everyone. So, as Michelle said, I am Niki Schaefer, and I'm the Vice President and General Counsel of RF. It's kind of a unique role at RF because, in addition to all the corporate legal stuff that most general counsels do, I get to oversee both compliance monitoring and enforcement. But that part of my job is actually not why I'm here today. I'm here today because about 5.5 years ago, a month before my 39th birthday, I suffered a stroke that completely changed my life. At first, in a bad way, because I lost my speech and my balance, but ultimately in the best way, because it completely altered how I make decisions at work and in my life outside of work. Uh, and that approach to decision making has allowed me to achieve a state of mental and physical health I simply didn't have before my stroke. Today, I'm going to talk to you about that journey, how I lived pre-stroke versus how I live now, because the changes that I made really shouldn't have required a life-threatening event to get me to make them. My hope is that you take pieces of my story that resonate with you and think about some of the changes that you can make to improve your own mental and physical well-being going forward. So I know, especially in the ERO, when people think lawyer, especially general counsel, they assume they can't relate. And I get it, even though I do like to think I'm a particularly cool general counsel. But I'm not just a lawyer. I am someone's parent, I'm someone's child, I'm someone's grandchild, sibling, cousin, spouse, boss, friend, board member, and a million other things. You can actually see behind me here are my kids, my husband when they were younger, and I was younger too. And my dogs are right behind me here. Um, I have tried to be the best I can be at all the things I am my whole life. My teenage children call me a try hard, and they don't mean that in a nice way. But it's true. From as early on as I can remember, I place such high standards on myself and my own performance of everything. And to meet my self-imposed standards of perfection, I convinced myself I needed straight A's to be the most popular girl in school, to be a star athlete, and I would do anything to achieve those things. As a student, and even in my early days as a practicing lawyer, that was all challenging, but it was achievable. But as I got older and I took on more things that I decided I had to do perfectly, whatever my definition of perfect was, I became a wife and a homeowner and a mom. And I felt so responsible for so many lives other than my own. And I took those responsibilities so seriously. And this was all happening while I was rising the ladder at work and taking on more responsibility there too. To be my unrealistic definition of perfect at all of those things, something had to give. And the very sad reality is that because I placed so little value on my own well being at the time, the thing that I gave up was my mental and physical health. I've always been a runner and I stopped taking the time to run. I was sleeping an average of 4 hours a night so I could get everything done. There were signs that I was having health issues that I chose not to address. For example, I have a family history of heart disease, and there were clear signals that my blood pressure was out of control. My eye actually hemorrhaged one day a couple of months before my stroke, and I knew it was from high blood pressure. And guess what I did about it? I did nothing. My entire eye was bright red and bloody, and I did nothing. I just let it heal. And I think about choices like that, and I'm so upset with myself, even to this day. But my bad choices continued, and they got even more life threatening, which leads me to the day of my stroke. It was honestly just a typical crazy work day for me. I was actually on my way to a happy hour after an afternoon meeting that I had with lawyers that were representing the company I was working for in a big piece of litigation. I walked into the bar And before I even ordered a drink, there was what I can only describe as a whoosh that came over my whole body. And all of a sudden, I felt incredibly dizzy. And I went to say I didn't feel well, but I had tremendous difficulty getting words to come out of my mouth. The lawyers that I was with actually offered to get me a car home, but I refused. And in a move I will regret for the rest of my life, I had them walk me to valet and help me get in my car. And I drove home on the highway. And it just gets worse from there. I made it home and I told my husband and my kids in very slurred words that I was sick. And I leaned on walls to get myself and my work bag upstairs so I could do the rest of the work I needed to do in my bed. I had a conference call where I luckily had to do very little talking. And I had a meeting with our CFO that I needed to prepare for the next day. So once I was lying down, I realized that the left side of my body was basically numb. So I typed notes for my meeting the next morning with one hand, and I luckily it was my right hand, and I'm right-handed. And also Googled my symptoms with one hand and diagnosed myself with vertigo. I went to sleep hoping that I would feel better in the morning, and I woke up at 4 a.m. to prepare for my meeting, which was not atypical for me at the time. But I still didn't have a lot of feeling on my left side. I was still incredibly dizzy, and I was still having tremendous difficulty speaking. So I at least decided I wasn't going to be able to meet with our CFO. And I emailed my notes to my boss and I told him that I was sick with vertigo. I also texted my colleague who was prone to vertigo and I told her my symptoms. And she told me it was definitely not vertigo and I should go to the emergency room. And I did not listen to her. My husband, not realizing what was going on because I couldn't really talk and I was trying to just kind of keep it all to myself, left for work early in the morning, as he always does. I texted my parents that I thought I needed to go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor for my vertigo and needed their help, but I didn't want to scare my kids. So I asked them to come over after I put my kids on the bus. And I leaned on walls and I crawled to get them dressed and ready for school. And then I didn't walk them down the driveway to their bus. My parents came over after that and they knew something was horribly wrong, but I was so stubborn and I refused to go to the emergency room. So my dad got me an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and my mom drove me. I was in the office of the ear, nose, and throat doctor for about 30 seconds, and he looked at my drooping face and my limp left side and heard me speak, and he freaked out. And he said, if my mom didn't take me to the emergency room immediately, he was going to call an ambulance. So I'm going to stop right now and do a public service announcement here because I had every single sign of a stroke and no one knew it for almost 24 hours. And I could be dead or I could have lost feeling on my left side and or my speech permanently. And part of the reason that no one thought it was a stroke, including me, is because I look exactly the same today as I did then. I have a few more gray hairs and some more wrinkles, but pretty much the same. And my point is that I don't look like someone who would have a stroke. However, there are a lot of stroke victims just like me, and their proper treatment is often delayed because it doesn't occur to people that they're having a stroke. So I figure if I can help one person be less ignorant than me when time is of the essence, I should probably try. The acronym that you need to remember is Be Fast. It's balance, eyes, face, arms, speech, time to call 911. My balance was off. My vision was impaired. The left side of my face was drooping. My left arm was pretty numb. And I had tremendous difficulty speaking. Time, immediately seeking medical help is the key to stroke survival and stroke recovery. And I basically played Russian roulette with my life because I was naive and I was stubborn and I thought I was invincible. And I really don't have words for how lucky I am to be speaking to all of you clearly in this moment today. So when I got to the emergency room, they were waiting for me. I had a series of scans after they took out my million earrings, which I couldn't get out myself. I don't know if you can see them on this camera, but I love an ear piercing and I always have. Um, the scans confirmed it was a stroke and I was admitted to the stroke unit. And in that moment, no one could tell me if my speech or my balance would come back. And that feeling of fear and loss that in the blink of an eye, I may have permanently become a woman who had trouble talking and walking, a woman who I didn't recognize. It was the most horrible feeling I've ever had in my life. And it's one that changed me forever. To everyone's great joy, especially my own, the very next day, there were signs that my speech was improving and I was starting to get some feeling back on my left side. And over the next 8 or so weeks, through intense physical and speech and occupational therapy, I became probably 98% of the person that I was pre stroke. And I continue to enjoy that luxury today. And it is a luxury, and one that I am flat out unwilling to take for granted again. In the 10 weeks that I spent on disability leave from work, especially because conversation was exhausting and pretty difficult for me, I had a lot of time in my own head to think about what happened, why it had happened, and how I needed to live differently going forward. I also started seeing a therapist to work through the extremely complicated set of emotions that a life-threatening event really throws at you. My stroke was not entirely my fault, but my poor decisions related to my health and how I allocated my time definitely were a contributing cause. And so I had to figure out a formula for decision making in my life that was more conducive to my mental and physical health. And that was really hard for me because I had spent 39 years allowing my mental and my physical health to really take a back seat. Um, One book that really, really helped me was called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown. It has become my decision making Bible. The premise is basically that going big on everything doesn't work. It just results in mediocrity at a million things and a lot of stress, which is a good description of pre stroke me. So figure out what's most important and impactful to you and go big on those things and let the other stuff just be the noise that it needs to be. But being disciplined about how you spend your time actually takes a lot of time and effort. And saying yes to everything, it doesn't require much thought and it doesn't involve the discomfort of saying no or navigating the feeling that you've disappointed people. I also think asking yourself why you are doing something or why you are wanting something and if it's worth it is a challenging and somewhat scary internal conversation to have. When I had it with myself in 2019, I realized so much of what I wanted out of my job at the time or my involvement in my kids' school or some of the people I was spending time with was about what other people wanted from me or what I thought they wanted for me. And so I decided that for the first time in my life, I was going to start making decisions at work and in my personal life based on what I thought was important and what I thought was urgent, not what other people told me was important or urgent. And I think that we all have this natural inclination to adopt other people's definitions of importance and of urgency instead of taking the time and having the confidence to decide that stuff for ourselves. So I approached my return to work and really the rest of my life with this new philosophy. And it was really, really scary until I realized that most people didn't notice. I just noticed how much happier and healthier I was. And most of the things I was doing were really not earth shattering at all. I do insist on 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night now. And I also try and work out most days of the week. Each of the million doctors I have seen over the years have really drilled into my head that sleep is one of the most important contributors to brain health and to our decision making. But I also made some minor changes in how I operate. When someone offers a project or opportunity to me, instead of automatic yes, I think about whether I want to take it on, whether I have capacity, whether someone else could or should really do it. And I evaluate the pros and cons for me of saying yes. When I get an email to multiple people asking a question, which I used to be the first one to respond to those, I think about whether I'm the right person to respond. And now I often choose to let someone else do it. When I'm told things like, it would be nice if I did this, or I went there, or I had more office presence, or whatever, even by my own boss, I think about what I'm sacrificing to do that. And I decide if it's worth it to me. Just because it would please someone else doesn't mean I have to do it. And that has been an incredibly freeing philosophy at work and in my life outside of work. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule. I have to do certain things because I just have to, or because they are the right thing to do. But it isn't everything like I used to think it was. At the end of the day, my stroke taught me that no one can look out for me better than me. And if I'm not going to do it, I'm I'm actually the one that suffers the most. And I still don't do a perfect job. I'm so much better than I used to be. But the old Niki sucks me in sometimes, actually, rather frequently. But luckily, I'm surrounded by family and friends and former and current colleagues that are incredibly good at keeping me honest with them and with myself. I've also had to grow a thicker skin. I do disappoint people sometimes. And sometimes, frankly, I disappoint myself, but it is usually in the name of prioritizing my mental and my physical health. And honestly, I really believe that it's those choices that are part of making me both a successful and a happy lawyer, boss, parent, spouse, daughter, sister, friend, board member, etc. You name it. So it's all really worth it. I think it is a fair statement to say that all of our plates are too full. I'm sure it is the reality, or at least the occasional reality, for every single person who's dialed into this call today. But each of us has the ability and the power to curate our plate so that it's a well balanced meal. And that meal may look a bit different for each of us, but the concept is exactly the same. I don't want you to leave this untech talk thinking that you're going to have a stroke because you're burning the candle at both ends. You're most likely not going to have one. What happened with my stroke was extremely rare and very complicated and a perfect storm. Um, and probably wouldn't be replicated in any of you. But I do want you to leave thinking that you can and you should curate your too full plate without having a stroke. So with that, I know Michelle had a few questions for me, and then I think we've got some Slido questions, and I'm happy to take questions from anyone else.
Thank you, Niki. And thank you so much for having the courage to share your story and in hopes that it'll help someone else. And like I had mentioned when I introduced you, I've heard you speak on this topic before, and I've found it to be so enlightening. So thank you for joining us today. So just my first question is, it must have been difficult to transition from a typical day of working so many hours, both at home and at work. And so to go from working so many hours to being at home for 10 weeks on disability leave, how did you handle that transition and arrive at the healthier you before us here today?
It's a great question. So my 10 weeks on disability leave was actually really busy. I had an intense regimen of speech, physical, and occupational therapy. Plus, brain trauma is really exhausting for your body. So I was really, really tired. The biggest challenge for me was figuring out if I should go back to work and how I was going to do it if I decided to do it, because it required some serious soul searching and some really hard conversations with my doctors, with myself, and with my family. And I won't bore you with the details of those conversations, but I'd like to talk a little bit about their outcomes. So, what I realized about myself is that work and my success at work is really, it's part of my identity. When I think about the things I like most about myself, one of those things is that I think I do a really good job at my job. And I like the example that I set for my kids that their mom can be a thought leader and a financial contributor. And I like that my success at work is my success. It's not success achieved through someone else. My family, however, was not so excited about me going back to work. They were really scared. Once you have a stroke, you are more likely to have another. And I don't think they trusted me, just based on my track record, to return to work in a way that was conducive to my health. My doctors insisted that if I went back to work, I reduced my office presence to 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. And that sounds like nothing now, but remember, this was pre-COVID. And I worked for a really traditional large manufacturing company. They were old school. And there was only one other lawyer that worked from home part-time of the 200 employees that were in our legal department there. And she was in a wheelchair. So her impairments, unlike mine, were visible. So to the outside world, I seemed completely back to myself. And with that came both judgment or perceived judgment from my boss and my colleagues. And I do think that some people did take note and maybe did have some resentment. But I honestly think the great majority didn't notice or didn't care. And I knew I could make this work from home thing work and let my work speak for itself. So I didn't have doubts about that. But I did really have to teach myself not to be self conscious about other people's judgments or perceived judgments of me. And the way I did that was by being really open about my new boundaries. I couldn't expect people to understand them or respect them if I didn't tell them what they were. And it is a practice that I am true to today. So, for example, last week I was supposed to go to the NERC board meeting in Vancouver. But this week I have this event today. And then I have a strategic session and a board meeting for the RF board where I'll be away from my teenage kids who are starting school this week. And the thought of leaving them 2 weeks in a row when I could easily listen into the NERC board meeting from home and also prepare properly for this week was totally stressing me out. So I told my boss that I didn't want to go to Vancouver and I explained why I didn't want to go. And he completely understood. And then, like today, it would have been ideal for you and I to have this exchange in person in the office. I know that, but I'm leaving town at the crack of dawn tomorrow. And the thought of coming in all day for this totally stressed me out. So I decided to do it this way. And it's working. I mean, maybe it would have been better if I were there, but it's working. And so my point is like we all have unique stressors and unique boundaries, but we can't expect people to accommodate them if we don't ask them to and don't explain why we're asking. So if you take one thing away from this whole talk today, I hope that it's that.
Thank you, Nikki. I love what you said too about not letting other people's judgment or perceived judgment affect your decisions. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. My next question is through your journey, you talk about learning to navigate the discomfort of saying no, which I think a lot of us can relate to. But any insight for the audience of how you find a way to say no without disappointing people or, quite frankly, jeopardizing your career?
Yeah. So my answer here kind of relates a little bit to the last question you asked, but I have a little more to say on the topic. There's a whole chapter in Essentialism about the art of saying no. I think the most comfortable way to ease into it for always yesers, like I was, and which I'm sure a lot of you are, is what I would call the non-response and the no but. By the non-response, I mean stop being the first to reply all to a question or a request for help. Be strategic when there's a question asked of a group. Are you the right person to answer this or take whatever it is on? Does it serve you as well as your organization? If not, let someone else do it. Now, that's not an absolute. There are some things you just have to do because people ask you, even if they ask a group, but you can be more discerning than you think you can be. And that one is a little easier because it's basically just taking time to think and then kind of inaction. The harder one is the no but, when someone is directly asking something of you, because this just inherently involves the guilt of saying no. And here, my advice is taking the time before you respond to think about the pros and cons of taking whatever it is on. What will you not be able to spend time doing? And is that okay with you? And if it's not okay with you, be honest with the asker about it. I can't do this because I'm so busy with XYZ. And then say something like, but if this is a bigger priority than any of those things, let's talk about how we can deprioritize something else on my plate and fit it in. Or I can't do this right now, but I could do this, which would help the cause. Or I don't have capacity to take this on, but I think so and so would be awesome at it. So why don't you ask her? The no but is kind of easier because you're offering an alternative and showing you care. And that helps, I think, with a little bit of the guilt of saying no.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great points and very helpful. Moving on to my next question, how can organizations and executives such as yourself bring concepts like essentialism that you described to the workplace to retain high-performing employees and engage them in a way to bring the best version of themselves to work?
Okay, so there are a few things here. First, authenticity and transparency. I'm obviously very open and honest about who I am and what my needs and my expectations are, I think that kind of clarity is helpful for me. And I think it's helpful for the people who work for and with me. Second, I think we all need to truly accept without judgment that people have different pressures weighing on them when it comes to their lives outside of work and different environments in which they thrive working. So maybe coming to the office every day is what's best for you. It's not for me. It doesn't mean that your way is better than mine or mine is better than yours. It's just different. And maybe one of your employees wants to become a leader of people eventually. Maybe someone else wants to remain an individual contributor. The decision trees for what work to take on look different for those people. And as leaders, I think we need to support and accept and help people navigate each of those paths, whatever they are. Lastly, I want to say this. I think we have responsibility as leaders to help ourselves and those on our team succeed. But the true power to bring the best version of ourselves to work is truly our own. So we each have the responsibility to advocate for ourselves. There is no one who knows our external pressures and our needs and our desires better than we know our own. You don't need a stroke or some other life crisis to be your own best advocate. You actually just have to convince yourself to do it. And it takes a lot of convincing sometimes, but I think it's an important point there.
I love that. Being your own advocate. I think that is so important that you can be your own advocate, make sure you're looking out for yourself, like you had mentioned, even in your story as well. Moving on to my next question. I feel like the concept of doing less can get you more in life is a foreign one for most of us. If someone wanted to improve their work-life balance, how could they get started?
So I'm gonna say I don't believe in work-life balance. I don't think I've ever had it, and I don't think I'm even trying to achieve it. Like this week, I think work wins. I'm totally unbalanced. I am giving myself to work this week because I need to and I want to, and I'm owning that. Last week, I said no work related travel so that I could feel better about the role I play in my family. I think it really is that the question you need to ask yourself is, are you spending your time doing the things that are most important to you? So whether that is work related or family related or friend related or extracurricular related. And if you're not spending your time that way, why not? Meaning, how are you spending your time and why are you spending it that way? I think the answer to those questions will help you figure out how to reallocate your time in a way that will be more fulfilling to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Nikki, we do have a few questions coming in through Slido from the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and pivot towards those. I want to
Mhm.
first recognize what we're showing on the screen is a comment that we got in, and it says, "Incredibly powerful story. Thank you so much for sharing." So I'm not alone in my thoughts with how your story can really resonate with people. But moving on to the first question that we have in Slido. Do you have any tips for how to communicate with people about mental impairments or limits to help them understand? So I'll kind of elaborate a little bit on this. I know you had mentioned um, that, even when you wanted to return to work, perhaps your family wasn't quite on board. And so maybe others have other family members similar to that. How could, what could, or what, anything that you could think of that would help them understand some of their limitations?
So, not knowing what limitations we're talking about, it's hard. I think it takes a lot of courage to be honest with other people about your weaknesses and your limitations. But I think that what you find is that people are a lot more receptive to hearing them and empathetic than you think they are. So my advice is to let go of whatever fear you have about sharing, whatever the limitations might be, and have faith that whoever you're informing of those limitations is going to receive it in a positive way. I think we tend to just assume that there's going to be some sort of negativity or judgment in response, and not that we're all immune from that, but um, I think we don't give people enough credit for being able to help us.
Thank you. Okay, and then the next question we have coming in is around where you talk about getting enough sleep and how it's so important, around 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. And so, how is it that you adjusted your daily routine to make sure that you're getting enough sleep, and that you make sure that you maintain that healthy number of hours without giving that up, and anything that has changed that help you with that?
Yeah, well, first I want to talk a little bit just about sleep and what I learned about it from my stroke. Because I think this is really important and something I certainly didn't understand pre-stroke. But sleeping 4 hours a night for such an extended period of time, like I did, not only contributed to my susceptibility to a stroke, it actually impaired my decision making in my life. One of my doctors told me it's kind of comparable to making decisions when you're drunk. And I think part of the reason I was just saying yes to everything is because I didn't even have the mental capacity for the challenges of the process of saying no. And I think I also thought I was fine on just 4 hours of sleep. But the reality is we really do need 7 to 8 for our brain health. And that isn't always realistic, and it's not an absolute, but it's certainly something I shoot for. And I think one way to be able to do it is to take some time, think about your schedule in a given day and how you're spending your time, and plan out your day so that you're not cramming in all of this noise at the end of it at a time when you would possibly go to sleep. Um, and try and plan your day accordingly. And then if you can't and you're kind of running into sleep hours, I do think at some point you have to get rational with yourself and just say, this stuff can wait till tomorrow. And my mental health and my physical health is more important than any of these things. And you've got to learn to let them go.
Thank you. Okay, last question here. How do you balance the ups and downs of life and your mental health, being able to take on more and be a high performer some months, and some months having to offload the extra items on your plate? So, how do you balance those ups and downs?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a question with a really long answer. And I'm not sure I always balance it so well. I think I have a very clear understanding of what is most important to me. And I think I have a very clear understanding of the kind of lawyer, general counsel I want to be, the kind of mother I want to be. And I do try and make sure that the things I'm spending time on are contributing to me, meeting that set of values that I have. But I don't do it all perfectly. And like I said, like this week is a work week for me. It has to be because of everything going on. And I forgive myself for kind of being a crappy mom while my kids are starting school. I just have no other choice this week. And I've stopped beating myself up about it. And I think that that is really helpful just for my overall mental state.
Thank you so much, Niki, for being with us here today. We really appreciate you telling your story, and thank you again for joining.